There is a silent law that governs every human interaction, and most people never recognize it until it is too late. Respect is rarely given because someone asks for it. It is given because people unconsciously sense that losing your respect would cost them something. The moment you begin chasing approval, defending every decision, or constantly proving your worth, you unintentionally send a message that your value depends on someone else's opinion. Human psychology responds to that message in predictable ways. People tend to value what values itself. They tend to dismiss what desperately seeks acceptance. Think about the people you naturally respect. It is rarely because they demanded your admiration. More often, it is because they carried themselves with quiet certainty. They did not argue for their importance. They lived as though their standards were already established. That subtle confidence changes the emotional atmosphere around them. It creates distance, not arrogance, but dignity. And dignity has always been one of the most intimidating forms of power. The tragedy is that many people spend years believing respect is something they can negotiate. They think that if they become kinder, more generous, more available, or more understanding, people will eventually appreciate them. But appreciation and respect are not the same thing. Someone can appreciate your generosity while continuing to exploit it. Someone can enjoy your loyalty while never valuing your presence. Respect begins where unnecessary sacrifice ends. One of the greatest mistakes people make is confusing tolerance with strength. They believe enduring constant disrespect demonstrates maturity. They convince themselves that remaining silent while others repeatedly cross their boundaries makes them the bigger person. But psychology teaches a different lesson. Every behavior you tolerate becomes the standard people believe they can continue. Human beings constantly test invisible limits. If no consequence follows disrespect, the mind quietly concludes that disrespect is acceptable. This is why boundaries are not acts of hostility, they are acts of self-definition. A boundary simply tells the world, this is where my self-respect begins. Without boundaries, your identity becomes negotiable. With boundaries, people understand there are lines they cannot cross without losing access to you. Notice how powerful individuals rarely spend their energy explaining every decision they make. They do not write lengthy defenses when criticized. They do not panic when misunderstood. They understand a timeless truth. Every explanation is an invitation for unnecessary judgment. The more you justify yourself to people who have already decided not to respect you, the more authority you surrender. Calm certainty speaks louder than endless arguments. There is also another psychological principle at work. Scarcity creates value. Accessibility without limits often creates familiarity, and familiarity without boundaries can slowly erode respect. This does not mean becoming cold or emotionally distant. It means recognizing that your attention, your time, and your emotional energy are valuable resources. When they are given away freely to anyone regardless of how they treat you, people unconsciously begin treating those resources as ordinary. Imagine someone who answers every message immediately, accepts every invitation, forgives every insult without change, and remains available regardless of how poorly they are treated. At first glance, this person appears generous, but over time, others stop seeing generosity. They begin expecting it. What was once appreciated becomes assumed, expectations replace gratitude, and once something becomes expected, respect quietly fades. Now compare that to someone who values their own time. They are kind, but not desperate. They listen, but they are not easily manipulated. They help others, but never at the cost of abandoning themselves. Their presence feels different because it is intentional rather than automatic. People instinctively recognize that this individual chooses where their energy goes. Choice creates perceived value. Desperation destroys it. There is a deeper philosophical lesson hidden beneath all of this. Every relationship teaches people how to treat you. Not through your words, but through your repeated actions. Every time you ignore your own standards to avoid conflict, you silently rewrite the rules of the relationship. Every time you allow disrespect because you fear losing someone, you communicate that keeping them matters more than respecting yourself. Ironically, this fear often creates the very outcome you hoped to avoid. People rarely admire those who abandon themselves for acceptance. History repeatedly reminds us that influential individuals possessed one common characteristic: they were willing to walk away. Walking away is not about pride, it is about independence. When people realize you are emotionally capable of leaving situations that compromise your dignity, they begin approaching you differently. Why? Because they understand they no longer control your emotional state. This is why emotional dependence is one of the greatest enemies of respect. The person who cannot tolerate being disliked becomes vulnerable to manipulation. The person who cannot stand being alone begins accepting treatment they would otherwise reject. But the individual who finds peace within themselves becomes remarkably difficult to intimidate. They no longer negotiate their principles in exchange for temporary comfort. Remember, confidence is not loud. Confidence does not announce itself. It does not seek applause. It quietly influences every decision you make. It appears when you refuse to argue with people committed to misunderstanding you. It appears when you decline opportunities that compromise your values. It appears when you remain calm under pressure while others expect emotional reactions. These moments gradually build an invisible reputation. And reputation, more than words, determines how people treat you. The interesting paradox is that the less you chase respect, the more naturally it arrives. This happens because genuine self-respect changes your behavior before it changes anyone else's perception. You become more selective with your attention, more disciplined with your emotions, more consistent with your principles. Others simply respond to the standards you have already established. Never forget this. People do not fear disrespecting someone because that person is loud, aggressive, or intimidating. They fear disrespecting someone who clearly respects themselves enough to walk away, remain composed, and never compromise their values for approval. That kind of strength cannot be borrowed. It must be built, choice by choice, day after day. So before you ask whether others respect you, ask a far more important question. Have you made self-respect your highest standard, or are you still negotiating your worth for acceptance? The answer to that question will determine how the world responds to you. Once you establish self-respect and stop seeking validation from everyone around you, something remarkable begins to happen. People start paying closer attention to how you respond under pressure. They no longer judge you by your words alone. They judge you by your emotional stability. This is where true influence begins, not in what you say, but in what you refuse to reveal. Most people believe power comes from speaking the loudest, reacting the fastest, or proving they can win every argument. But history tells a different story. The individuals who left the deepest psychological impact were often those who mastered restraint. They understood that emotions are contagious, and whoever controls their own emotions quietly begins influencing the emotions of everyone else in the room. Think about the last time you saw someone lose control during a disagreement. Perhaps they raised their voice, became defensive, interrupted constantly, or desperately tried to prove they were right. In that moment, did they appear powerful? Usually not. They appeared predictable. The moment someone can predict your emotional reaction, they gain leverage over you. They know exactly which buttons to press because you have unknowingly handed them the instruction manual. This is why emotional discipline is one of the greatest forms of psychological strength. It creates uncertainty, and uncertainty has always commanded respect. Human beings are naturally uncomfortable when they cannot accurately predict another person's behavior. We constantly observe facial expressions, tone of voice, and body language to determine what someone is thinking. We look for emotional clues because they help us feel in control. But when someone remains calm under pressure, speaks carefully instead of impulsively, and refuses to react emotionally to provocation, that certainty disappears. Suddenly, the other person begins questioning themselves instead of controlling you. Silence plays a powerful role in this process. Most people fear silence because they associate it with weakness or awkwardness. They rush to fill every pause with explanations, apologies, or unnecessary words. Yet silence has a unique psychological effect. It forces other people to think. It interrupts their expectations. Instead of controlling the conversation, they begin wondering what you are thinking. In many situations, silence becomes louder than any argument. Consider negotiations, leadership, or moments of conflict. The person who speaks first after an uncomfortable pause often reveals more than they intended. They expose their emotions, their fears, or their need for approval. The person who remains patient gains information without sacrificing control. This does not mean becoming cold or manipulative. It means understanding that words lose value when they are used carelessly. Every unnecessary explanation weakens your position. Every impulsive reaction gives away a piece of your emotional independence. There is another principle worth understanding. Anger often feels powerful in the moment, but it usually benefits the person who provoked it. Why? Because anger narrows perception. It shifts your attention from long-term strategy to immediate emotion. Decisions made in emotional storms rarely produce lasting victories. Powerful individuals understand the difference between reacting and responding. A reaction is automatic. It is driven by impulse. A response is intentional. It is guided by purpose. This difference may appear small, but it changes everything. Imagine two people receiving the same insult. The first immediately becomes defensive, arguing for several minutes to prove the insult is false. The second simply observes, smiles slightly, and continues the conversation without emotional investment. Who appears stronger? The answer has little to do with the words exchanged. It has everything to do with emotional ownership. The second person demonstrates something incredibly rare. They communicate that their emotional state cannot be purchased by another person's opinion. That independence quietly commands respect because it is uncommon. One reason people struggle with this is because they mistake emotional expression for emotional control. Modern culture often encourages immediate expression of every feeling. While honest communication has its place, wisdom requires discernment. Not every emotion deserves immediate expression. Sometimes strength lies in observing your emotions before allowing them to shape your behavior. Ancient philosophers understood this well. They believed external events possess less power over us than our interpretation of those events. Two people can experience identical criticism, yet one collapses while the other grows stronger. The difference is not the criticism itself. The difference is internal mastery. This is why confidence should never depend on praise. If compliments determine your confidence, criticism will inevitably destroy it. The person whose identity depends on outside approval becomes emotionally controlled by outside opinions. Their mood rises and falls according to someone else's judgment. Real confidence operates differently. It comes from internal standards rather than external applause. When your worth is rooted in your principles instead of public opinion, criticism loses much of its ability to disturb you. You begin evaluating feedback objectively rather than emotionally. Useful criticism becomes education. Meaningless criticism becomes background noise. This shift dramatically changes how others perceive you. People quickly realize they cannot manipulate you through guilt, shame, or emotional pressure. Attempts to provoke dramatic reactions fail. Attempts to intimidate lose effectiveness. Gradually, many stop trying altogether because manipulation only succeeds when someone willingly participates. Body language also reflects this internal discipline. Notice how emotionally secure individuals move deliberately. They avoid restless gestures, their posture remains balanced, their eye contact is calm rather than confrontational. They listen without constantly interrupting. These behaviors may seem ordinary, yet together they communicate extraordinary confidence. Psychologists often describe this as emotional congruence. Your external behavior aligns with your internal stability. There is no desperate performance because there is nothing to prove. Contrast this with insecurity. Insecurity constantly seeks evidence of acceptance. It speaks too quickly, laughs too loudly at every joke, apologizes unnecessarily, and feels compelled to defend every decision. None of these behaviors make someone weak by themselves, but repeated together, they reveal an internal fear of rejection. People sense this fear, often without consciously realizing it. The opposite is equally true. When someone consistently demonstrates calm self-possession, people begin adjusting their own behavior around them. Conversations become more respectful, challenges become more thoughtful, even disagreements become measured because emotional chaos no longer produces the desired result. This is why silent strength is far more intimidating than loud aggression. Aggression announces insecurity disguised as confidence. Silent strength announces confidence that requires no audience, and perhaps the greatest test of this principle comes when you are misunderstood. There will be moments when people misjudge your intentions, question your character, or spread opinions that are unfair. Your instinct will be to defend yourself immediately. Resist that temptation unless genuine clarification serves a meaningful purpose. Time has a remarkable habit of exposing consistency. If your character remains steady, your actions eventually speak louder than temporary misunderstandings. Reputation built over years cannot be destroyed by a moment unless you help destroy it through emotional overreaction. Never forget that every difficult conversation presents a hidden choice. You can either protect your ego or protect your power. The ego demands immediate victory. Power patiently builds lasting influence, and those who truly command respect understand which one is worth keeping. So, the next time someone tries to provoke you, remember this simple truth. The strongest person in the room is rarely the loudest. It is the one who refuses to surrender control of their emotions. Master your reactions, and you will master how the world responds to you. Now, we arrive at the final piece of the puzzle. If self-respect is the foundation, and emotional discipline is the shield that protects it, then reputation is the fortress that makes people think twice before challenging you. This is where respect becomes permanent. It is no longer dependent on first impressions or isolated moments of confidence. It becomes a pattern that others recognize long before they interact with you. Most people spend their lives trying to control how others perceive them. They carefully choose their words, polish their image, and worry endlessly about what people might think. Yet they overlook the one thing that truly shapes reputation: consistent action. People eventually forget your explanations, but they rarely forget your patterns. Your habits become your identity in the minds of others. This is why powerful people focus less on appearing strong and more on becoming reliable. They understand that every decision either strengthens or weakens the invisible reputation they carry into every room. Reputation is built in silence. It is created in the moments no one applauds. It grows every time you keep your word when breaking it would have been easier. It grows every time you refuse to compromise your principles for temporary approval. It grows every time you walk away from situations that diminish your dignity instead of clinging to them out of fear. Human beings constantly collect evidence about one another. Every interaction becomes another piece of a psychological puzzle. They ask themselves, often unconsciously, can this person be manipulated? Will they abandon their standards under pressure? Are their boundaries real, or are they only words? Eventually, the answers become clear. If someone repeatedly sees you tolerate disrespect without consequence, they begin believing there are no real limits. But if they see that your standards remain firm regardless of who stands before you, something changes. They realize that your values are not performances, they are principles. This is what makes disrespect expensive. Notice that truly respected individuals rarely threaten anyone. They do not need to announce consequences because their actions have already established them. People already know what happens when boundaries are crossed. Access is lost, trust disappears, opportunities vanish. Not because of revenge, but because of consistency. There is an important distinction here. Many people confuse intimidation with influence. Intimidation depends on fear of punishment. Influence depends on respect for character. One disappears the moment authority is removed. The other remains even when no one is watching. If your goal is merely to make people afraid of you, you will constantly need to prove your strength. But if your goal is to become someone whose principles cannot be compromised, your reputation begins doing much of the work for you. One of the greatest sources of personal power is selectivity. Not everyone deserves your time, not everyone deserves your trust. Not everyone deserves unlimited access to your life. This may sound harsh in a world that encourages constant availability, but scarcity has always increased value. When your attention is available to everyone regardless of their behavior, it gradually loses significance. But when people understand that your presence must be earned through mutual respect, they naturally become more thoughtful in how they treat you. The strongest boundaries are rarely spoken, they are demonstrated. Someone cancels your plans repeatedly without respect for your time. You quietly stop making yourself available. Someone continuously disrespects your values. You reduce your emotional investment. Someone repeatedly breaks your trust. You do not seek revenge. You simply remove their access to your confidence. These actions require remarkable discipline because they replace emotional reaction with intentional decision. Remember, consequences do not always need to be dramatic. Sometimes the most powerful consequence is your absence. People often underestimate the psychological impact of losing access to someone who genuinely respects themselves. At first, they may not notice, but over time they begin comparing your quiet consistency with the chaos surrounding them. They realize that what they lost was not merely another relationship. They lost someone whose standards created stability. This is why desperation always weakens reputation. The person who constantly returns after repeated disrespect unintentionally teaches others that their boundaries are temporary. Their words promise consequences, but their actions erase them. Over time, credibility disappears. Powerful individuals understand that credibility is one of the most valuable currencies they possess. Every promise kept increases it. Every standard maintained protects it. Every difficult decision strengthens it. This applies not only to relationships, but to every area of life. In your career, people respect those who consistently deliver excellence without seeking constant recognition. In leadership, people follow those whose decisions remain aligned with their principles, even during difficult moments. In friendships, people trust those who demonstrate loyalty without sacrificing integrity. In family, people admire those who remain compassionate without becoming emotionally controlled. Consistency transforms character into reputation. There is another lesson hidden beneath this idea. Your greatest competition is not another person. It is the weaker version of yourself that is tempted to compromise your values for temporary comfort. Every day presents this choice. Will you remain silent when speaking would betray your principles? Will you speak when silence would betray your integrity? Will you stay where you are tolerated instead of appreciated? Will you sacrifice long-term respect for short-term approval? These decisions appear small in isolation, but over months and years they become the architecture of your life. Ancient philosophers often reminded us that character is destiny. Modern psychology simply explains why. Human beings naturally predict future behavior from repeated patterns. When your actions repeatedly demonstrate courage, discipline, emotional control, and integrity, people begin expecting those qualities from you. That expectation becomes your reputation, and reputation travels faster than words. Long before you enter a room, your habits have already introduced you. Long before a conversation begins, your consistency has already influenced expectations. Long before conflict arises, people already know how far they can go. This is the quiet authority that cannot be manufactured overnight. It is earned through thousands of ordinary decisions. Finally, understand this profound paradox. The objective is never to make people fear you personally. Fear built on aggression creates resistance. Fear built on manipulation creates resentment. Fear built on ego eventually collapses. Instead, become someone whose standards are so unwavering that people fear the consequences of treating you without respect. Let them fear losing your trust because it cannot easily be regained. Let them fear losing your presence because your company brings value. Let them fear losing opportunities that come through your reliability, your discipline, and your integrity. That is not domination, that is earned authority, and unlike forced power, earned authority grows stronger with time. So as you leave today, remember this. Every conversation, every decision, every boundary, and every promise is shaping the reputation you will carry tomorrow. Ask yourself honestly, are your daily actions teaching people to respect your standards, or are they teaching people that your standards can be negotiated? Because in the end, people do not fear disrespecting those who demand respect. They fear disrespecting those whose character, consistency, and self-respect make disrespect too costly to risk. Build that reputation, protect it relentlessly, and you will never have to ask the world to respect you again.